Is this thing on? Welcome back to Big Mouth and fancy seeing you here in June. A very welcome, my friends, and especially my enemies. Come in, sit down, no touching. I don't do the touching. It's Friday and welcome to Smallville, the Saviour of Superman, episode 13. Now, we're going to talk about something very controversial. Now, I think today's episode is going to be very controversial because a lot of Smallville fans are not going to agree with me. I'm going to talk about the series finale of Smallville. I believe, and this is my personal opinion, that the Smallville series finale was a betrayal. It was a betrayal to Alfred Gough and Miles Miller. It was a betrayal to the fans that have been watching since the pilot. It was not a betrayal for people who loved the final three seasons and loved what they did. Personally, I love elements of the final three seasons. I think that Kelly and Brian did the best what they could with pressure coming from the CW to make it more attractive to young females. And they absolutely did that. There were some elements I absolutely loved. Absolute Justice, the Legion episode, Bride. There were a lot of things I loved about the final three seasons. And they evolved the show in a lot of ways. And I can't deny that. Cassidy Freeman was amazing as Tess Mercer. I like Justin Hartley, but I think it was a mistake to make him a series regular. I personally would have brought in maybe I would have brought back Lillian Luthor. I know she's supposed to be dead, but I would have found a way of bringing her back so she could play off of Tess Mercer, and that would have been a really interesting female versus female dynamic. That's what I would have done. But we're talking about the series finale, and we're going to be talking about the final season. I thought, again, I like elements of the final season of Smallville, but again, it's not that epicness. It's not big enough. We were watching this show for 10 years. I think it was a mistake to not have John Schneider as a regular in the final season. I think it was a mistake not to have Annette O'Toole as a regular in the final season. Well, Mick, how can you do that? Jonathan's dead. What are you going to do with Martha? Listen, they brought us that Ultraman verse, right? All they had to do, right, is to make John Schneider and Annette O'Toole regulars. Basically, what you do is you have a feature-length season premiere, which will be about 90 minutes if you have two episodes together. You set up the whole Ultraman universe. Clark's there for some reason. You kind of try and do it after he falls off the roof and everything. You find a way, right? And he ends up in the Ultraman universe, right? He finds out Jonathan Kent's there. He meets him. By the end of that first episode, he befriends the alternate Ultraman verse of Jonathan Kent. He comes back with Clark to Smallville Earth 1. He moves into the farm with Clark. And then Martha is introduced to him. And within the season, they get to know each other. And they fall in love. At first, Martha's saying, I'll never fall in love with this man. You're not my Jonathan. So all of a sudden, you've got something very interesting going on. Even though the OG Jonathan is dead, and you do it the same with Lionel. You have Lionel as a full-time character from the Ultraman universe, and you bring him through from the season premiere. Then you've got something really, really interesting. Now, the problem with the series finale, a lot of it is they tried to make the romantic situation between Clark and Lois the be-all and end-all. Now, we all know that Clark and Lois's relationship is iconic in the comics. It's iconic in the films. It's important, and I understand that. But because of final seasons of shows, they lessen the budget. That was another problem that Smallville had. But then you have to be creative in the story I was trying to say. If you've got a lesser budget, you can't do Darkseid. They couldn't afford to do Darkseid. It was obvious. Darkseid Lionel was terrible. It was terrible for John Glover, and he'll never say that, of course. It was terrible for us watching it. And at the end of the day, even the way Clark beats him is very, very easy. Look, that finale just simply was a betrayal, and it wasn't good enough. So what could we have done differently with the finale and the final season? Now, one of the big problems that Kelly and Brian did, and only they know why they did it. I mean, a couple of seasons earlier, they killed off Lex. Now, obviously, Michael wasn't involved after season 7, but they had him. Well, they did something really clever. They had him It like kind of, he was like this big architect. He was sitting in a big chair. He was injured from, after the fortress collapsed, but he was making things happen. So we could see the back of his head in this computerized chair. It was awesome. It was classic comic book stuff. And I thought, isn't this a clever way to have Lex without showing him properly and without Michael being in it, innit? This is what he's going to do for like the remaining seasons of Smallville. He's going to be manipulating things from the background. Awesome. Then all of a sudden, they decided to kill him off. And as I said the other day, I remember Tess going, Lex is dead. And I'm thinking, no, why would you do that? Because you've got to bring him back by the end of the series. You have to. It's Lex Luthor. You can't kill him off. So let's just say Michael refused to come back. And he was refusing to come back. Basically, they used what they did to try and have him into a corner, so he'd have to come back to finish off Lex's arc. And I'm sure of it. And I'm sure they knew a side of him wouldn't want to leave his character in a bad situation, because he cared. He cared about what he did for those previous 7 seasons. But what if he didn't come back? They would have had to get some old VT from Hourglass with Michael wearing like the President Luthor white suit, and they could have done that kind of footage that they did in the series finale of Lex becoming president, and that would be it. But if he didn't come back, then fancy editing would have been needed again to have the whole, alternate Earth Lionel kind of resurrecting him through a clone and through Darkseid and all that. So it could have been done. They could have got away with what they did without Michael. Now, Michael's in 2 scenes in the finale. Without Michael in this finale is dead. This finale is dead with the direction they went in it. There would have been no cord. That scene with Michael and Tom as Lex and Clark in the burnt out mansion was powerful stuff. It really was. And Kelly and Brian really went to town with the dialogue. I really, really liked it. But then there was the scene with Lex and Tess. For me, it didn't work because they didn't have any on-screen history. We never saw them together. I think they also, obviously, I don't know when Alan Miles decided they were leaving Smallville, they weren't going to run it anymore. Maybe it was a sudden decision, because I think if Kelly and Brian, because Kelly and Brian were writers on the show and producers on the show even before they took over for the final 3 seasons. I was watching season 7 the other day, and I'm thinking, they had this Gina character who was Lex's assistant. They could have, instead of having her, they could have introduced Tess via season 7, and it would just be a neater crossover. But sometimes on Smallville, I think they weren't thinking that far ahead, and you can't when you're working on a show that could be cancelled any time, I suppose. And with Al Miles leaving, everything was so uncertain, and there was a writer's strike during season 7. So I'm not saying this stuff would have been easier for them, but it just would have been easier to introduce Tess if you kind of leaked her in. On and off, in and out from the season 7, and that's certainly how I would have done it. But I think if I could ever ask Al Miles a question, it would be, if you did remain on the show as showrunners and executives for the final 3 seasons, what would you have done? What arcs would you have implemented through season 8, 9, and 10? Because I don't think they would have went with Doomsday. I doubt they would have gone with Zod. And I doubt they would have gone with Darkseid, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they were those are their initial ideas that Kelly and Brian were working on. So I think if Alan Miles kind of remained on the show till its end, the show would have ended. Look, the show would have ended in a different way. It wasn't. Look, that series finale and that final season wasn't Alan Miles' final vision. There's no question about it. But I'll repeat myself and say that series finale was an absolute betrayal from start to finish. As I say, there's elements that are okay. Jonathan's ghost, Martha coming back. Clark wanting to sell the farm, I just never understood. They tried to contrive something that he wanted to walk away from his past and forget everything, and everyone's trying to persuade him. Then there's this whole thing about Lois wanting to cancel the wedding, which is contrived. Then she changes her mind, then he decides maybe she's right, maybe they shouldn't get married. It's a little bit emotional. It works. But as I say, for the first, because this is done in 2 parts, this series finale, but it's shown in 1 episode, even on the DVDs and even on Amazon Prime, which it's on Prime Video. But it's kind of interesting that they really, the whole romantic thing between Clark and Lois was the dominant force. And they never even wrapped up the concept of Clark selling the farm. In the end, did he sell it or did he change his mind because he started to change his mind about leaving his past behind? Well, we've seen pictures for this Arrowverse crossover, Crisis on Infinite Earths, where he's on the farm with Lois Lane and Clark Kent, played by Tyler Heckley. So if they're on the farm, that means he didn't sell it. Or is this modern times Smallville Clark Kent? Or is there a bit of time travel? Do they have, do the Arrowverse team have to go to a certain point in time in that Smallville universe to stop the crisis? And maybe they go before Clark becomes Superman, before the series finale. I think that could be a very real thing. But I was watching the finale and I was watching the kind of Arrowverse pictures they showed us of Tom on the farm with Tyler Hecklin and Erica Durant and their other version of Lois Lane, which I don't like, by the way, nothing personal to the actor. I just don't like that casting. And I was thinking, well, if they're on the farm, that means he didn't sell it. But it all depends if this is present-day Smallville. We still don't know if Tom's going to wear the costume. I mean, being a long-time Smallville fan and not knowing Tom, but, the guy wouldn't even wear the cape and the tights for the series finale, which I think wasn't fair on the fans, by the way. But that was his decision. I respect his decision. I just don't agree with his decision. And I think a lot of people made a big thing about him not wearing the costume, the people who weren't happy with what happened with the finale. To be honest with you, even though that was part of the betrayal, I think there were bigger things that really, really upset me. Because I think ultimately, I didn't like the way they did him flying. It looked very amateurish and they wouldn't show a close-up. Tom didn't want a close-up of himself in the costume, even though he was never in the costume. It was all digital stuff they were doing when he's flying and he saves the plane. I like the bit when Lois is looking at him through the plane window. It's very emotional. And I think that bit absolutely works. And it shows you the journey that those characters and the journey that Clark's been on. But for me, personally, that wasn't the series finale I wanted to see. And then we go to Chloe, and I spoke about this the other day. Look, her ending just didn't make sense whatsoever. They had this whole thing where her and Oliver were married and this whole relationship. She's reading a comic book to Oliver's son. I don't know if they've had a child because the beginning of the series finale set 7 years in the future, and she's reading a book called Smallville. And, she's basically telling this kid, where Superman comes from, which is interesting because is this book in comic books? Does everyone know that Superman comes from Smallville just because they don't know Clark's name? It wouldn't be too difficult. Or is this just a personal comic that Chloe wrote herself? Again, then they try and set something up without telling you things. I don't agree that we should be spoon-fed with everything, and Smallville didn't really do that, and I'm glad. But elements like that, you kind of think, well, I don't get that. And I think this is why Alan Miles, when asked about the series finale, said they found it confusing, but they said, we understand how difficult it is to, wrap up 10 years of TV. And it is difficult, but it's still possible and probable. And ultimately, look, it's not the worst thing in the world, but I was devastated after I first saw that series finale. I felt betrayed personally because I expected something a lot more special. I mean, I was underwhelmed by the season before it anyway, season 10. I just didn't think it was good enough what they did. There were some great standalone episodes, but at the end of the day, there was crap episodes like Fortune. They'd already done Escape the year before, and they decided to do another comedy-filled filler. Oh, you know what? There was, as I say, season 10 had some elements that were okay. But I just think if Jonathan and Martha, Ultraman versus Jonathan's there, and Martha get to know each other, it would have been very interesting. Then you keep Jonathan alive. It's a very interesting way of keeping him alive, and having Lionel full-time within that season as well would have been really interesting, even though we did see a lot of Lionel. And again, I wasn't overly happy because I think if anyone who experienced OG Lionel, it was very difficult to accept. I mean, John Glover did a great job, like he does with everything. It's nothing to do with John. But I just think they made some bad decisions. And in the end, it was a typical final season, very underwhelming. And basically, the only iconic moment is when he opens his shirt and you see his Superman costume underneath. That is very iconic. And it kind of finishes in the right way. The stuff they did with Jimmy Olsen, again, very messy from season 8. That wasn't Jimmy Olsen. That was Jimmy Olsen's brother. And Jimmy Olsen's brother, obviously the future real Jimmy Olsen, looks exactly like Aaron Ashmore. And there's some very messy situations. But I think if we just finish off talking about this, it wasn't the ending it deserved. And I remember when, is it Brian Q. Miller, who was a producer and writer on Smallville, did the Smallville Season 11 comic, and he made it clear from the beginning he wasn't going to fix alleged problems that the fans thought there was in the comics. That really, really upset me, because that was a great opportunity. Now, the Season 11 comics are awesome. Don't get me wrong, you get a lot of Lex, he's starting to get his memory back, he's starting to get total recall. He has this conversation with Clyde, he goes, I heard we were friends in Smallville. So there's some interesting things in that. I mean, I haven't read them all, but I think they were interesting comics, and that would be a great kind of next evolution if they ever wanted to bring back Smallville. I think one day, like Lost, it's going to come back. So that's going to be very interesting. But I want to know what you think. Do you believe the series finale of Smallville was a betrayal? Do you believe the final season could have had a better premise and could have been better? Please comment down below and like, share and subscribe.